So, as Barry said, I have a background in graphic design. Here are my degrees, various degrees, and you will see that what I do today could have nothing to do with it, but somehow it does. So these are like examples of things I used to do in the past, like 10 years ago. I used to do graphic design. I did the visual identity of the Grand Palais in Paris and a couple of like big projects. And while studying and while working as a graphic designer, I think I was a bit of a producer without knowing it. This is an example of an exhibition for which I designed all the scenography in my school in 2007. This is a type design exhibition that I toured. And while touring it, I had to work on adapting it. Like this was the first iteration, this was the second, this was the third of the same content. And you can see a lot of similarities with this picture and the one Joanie showed. So I guess I have a lot of experience in wallpapers and things like that. I ended up following a large setup of an installation by Daniel Buren in the Grand Palais, and I ended up there really by accident, and I had to produce whatever content to put on the social networks while they were setting up and while a lot of events were going on during the installation time. And during all these experiences, I had no idea that this could actually be a job. Producer title is much more usual in the States or even in the UK, but it's not that common in France. So I did all of that unpaid at the time, and now I'm kind of doing the same, but trying to make my living out of it. So again, by accident, I ended up working at SAT as a head of communication for 6 or 8 months, and I was lucky to be there during the Vancouver Olympics, so I ended up handling a lot of really cool projects as part of the Cultural Olympics. So I had been friends with Romain Tardy from Anti-VJ since high school, so I knew a lot of what was happening on the digital scene in Europe, but I was just a spectator of it, and it's really completely random that I ended up working as well at Mapping Festival in Geneva, and this is where I met Joanie. And this is how, in 2013, I ended up with him in Japan. I was supposed to be there on a holiday, but as Joanie decided on the plane to make a completely new project there, when we got there, everything was like chaos. So I couldn't just like stay and visit Japan, and that's when I became Joanie's producer. Like I really had to help out because in a working contexts with Japanese people, you have to tell them what to do. So if you don't have someone acting like a boss, nothing will happen. So how do I work? I'm officially head of production at Studio Joanie Lemercier. The studio is basically Joanie and myself, so I'm not the head of a lot of people, but when we have bigger projects, we love to have the opportunity to collaborate with other people, and this is when I need to handle this collaboration with other people. And on a daily basis, there's a lot to do. So working on a full collaboration with someone means total transparency, full trust, knowing each other, a lot of communication, human patience. It's difficult to explain what I do in the studio because I take care of like everything, including the impossible. So that's my daily job on one hand, and as Barry mentioned, I also collaborate with many various artists. It's been changing a while recently. I had taken a lot of collaborations and started drowning a bit into this. So now I've kind of chosen specific projects instead of like working with an artist on whatever he's doing or whatever he wants to do. So here are a couple examples of projects that I know very well, that I have already set up sometimes. So whenever I get requests or whenever I meet with people, this is a lot of informal discussions, a lot of networking, and when someone tells me, oh, I would love something interactive and full of colors, I'm like, hey, I have this really cool project by Memo Acten. I knew this project by Carl MacDonald and Jonas Jean, and it had never been shown in Europe, so 3 years ago I helped making it happen by knowing that some people in France had disco balls and another person in another city in France had a really amazing greenhouse and wanted to do something with light. And so I make connections and help communication. I am representing one really cool VR project, and there is a lot to say about VR, especially the problem of like having festivals with thousands of people and a single user experience, but that's another talk. But we could have a really interesting discussion about that, I guess. I helped several times with this project by Robert Enke because some people are afraid of Robert's projects because of the lasers constraints and problem, and whenever I hear that, I'm like, but do you know he has this really cool project that is really much easier to set up than his other projects. So I like, for example, on this one, I never get paid out of that. I just help the connection, and I know that if one day, as now I also start organizing event, I know that I have a special connection with Robert, and maybe we can do something together. So it's really as much helping the community as doing this as a job. Joanie is not so much of a performance person, so I also and often I see the same performances wherever I go for projects, and I really try to support performances when I find good ones. So this one is a really nice one by a French visual artist, Jacques Perconte, and Jean-Benoît Dunkel is one half of music band Hair. So this is a really... I love to produce this performance in black and white line, geometric aesthetic lineup, because then you have a huge splash of colors for 45 minutes, and I love the contrast of that. As I have a chance to travel for projects, especially going with Joanie, I ended up discovering, that's an example, I ended up discovering this piece by a Korean collective, and I managed to bring it to Europe and to show it in 2 places in France. And yeah, I was really proud of taking this piece out of Korea, because we discovered a lot of amazing Korean artists in Korea, and you don't see them outside of Korea. So as I said, I'm mostly Joanie's producer, other people producer. But for a year and a half now, I've been asked several times to curate a program for a festival or for some strange events. And as I said, I know the possibilities, I know the costs, I know the artists, and I'm trying to make nice things out of that. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about what it is to be a digital art producer, but you have to keep in mind that I don't really know. So yeah, it's kind of it's going to be a lot of lists. So this is the various names I can be called depending on the context and the country. It's really interesting to see how this has to do with culture as well. But long story short, in a global way, I try to make things realistic, feasible, and possible by having a global point of view on time, space, money, logistics, text, everything that you can think of, and I try also to think about what you would not think of. To be pragmatic, when a project starts, I very often feel like this. At other moments, I'm going to feel a lot like that. Then I have to take a deep breath and, relax. This is not my top thing. To be able to juggle with whatever it's gonna happen. And at the end, be super excited by the result. So this means that on a daily basis, I go to places, I try to stay curious, even if I travel a lot and see a lot of festivals, and when you get there, you're tired, and maybe you don't want to stay for the performances, but maybe that's when you're going to see something very extraordinary. To always look for what's new and always understand technologies. I don't code, but I have a geek background, which allows me to understand whatever the artist I'm working with is doing. For example, when I started collaborating with Russian collective Tundra, I didn't know anything about moving lights, moving heads, DMX control, and I wouldn't be able to control any lights, but I understand what addressing channels means in terms of time and what's going to be the possible problems if you change something, as well as understanding that BMFL machines are as expensive as a 20K Christie projector. It's just like understand the big picture of the technology I have to handle. Before a project, I email a lot. I discuss budgets. I ask 3 times for floor plans that I will get without measurements. Ideally, I manage to get 3D plans. Then I also handle travels, accommodation, per diem, schedule. I mean, everything very pragmatic. During the project development, I work a lot with the artist to remind him the deadline, because like we want the project on the opening night, not a week after. And I always ask, like that's all the time, I try to ask the stupid questions, because things that are going to seem very obvious. Let me find an example. Yeah, like maybe it's going to be a problem if the power is turned off at night. So we have to ask, is the power going to be turned off at night? Because in some places it's like automatic, and there's no way you can have the computer keep running overnight, and maybe that's going to be a huge problem. During setup, you will find me drawing 1,000 black dots on a wall. You will see me making a pyramid factory in a flat. That was the one for the Milan Fashion Week. A lot of crazy money everywhere, but we would have access to the venue only twice 6 hours to set up many pyramids. And this is just like one of the 6 zones we had to cover with pyramids. So we had to pre-mount them and then find a way to transport them. This is the mounting of the trusses for the blueprint project Joanie showed before, and it was a good thing that I was there 3 days before Joanie's arrival, because I saw that the technical team who had the plans did not align properly the trusses, which would have been a big problem because Joanie had worked for a month and a half to create this specific peak moment where the image from the monolith and the front screens would match. And I also love to draw on ladders. As Joanie said, it's really nice after 2-3 months of emailing to make a project happen to end up drawing bamboos for 3 days. So during showtime, I document, maybe not myself, but I make sure that someone is doing it, because I can think about 2 or 3 amazing projects we have 0 documentation of, like especially the big one-offs mapping in this church in Bordeaux. And then you're like, how could we let that happen? But it's because, you know, it's the crazy time, the show time, and you don't think about that. And you think some people are going to do it, and sometimes nobody does it. And my job is also after the event to, like, get paid. Make sure we have a nice video report, make sure we thank everyone, because this is, like, we are part of a big family, and this is also very important. And sometimes I won't get too much into that, but we've managed to ship several projects without going there, and this is a whole other scenario. I have to work a lot on setup manuals and make sure that I take pictures of everything we send, and when the project is over, sometimes it's going to be 2 or 3 months after, I have to remember that we have a computer in Moscow and we need it back with the power plug. So as I said, maybe I sound like I know what I'm doing, but it's always different. So there is a lot of improvisation, I guess, but at the end, it's really worth it. So this is me in front of things. I was happy, and this is my cat, because sometimes she helps me. So what's the deal about, like Joanie mentioned that a little bit. This is something that happened, and now we are trying to control it, meaning finding a balance between artistic and commercial projects, because it's hard times, and all public, artistic based organizations have less and less money. So I think we have no choice as people working with artists than pushing them towards commercial projects. And I think I have a role of protecting the artistic gesture of what the artist is doing. Sorry, it's a bit confused, but you get the big idea. So we work on this kind of trio between festival-based projects, gallery pieces, Joanie mentioned, and commercial commission projects. I know this is very different between the US and Europe, because we are lucky enough to have a long history of public funding for the arts, whereas you don't have so much of it in the US. But the result is that it's a lot, I would say it's a bit of a it's a bit of a shameful thing to do for an artist to work for a company, especially in Europe. So a lot of artists are like, no, I don't want to work for a company. They're going to buy my soul and everything. And I really think that this is changing. I always use the example of how Red Bull can support amazing events without putting their logotypes all over the place, how Vice did a lot of things in this direction. So I think I have to explain a lot to both parties how we can work together. And Joanie mentioned the Barney's project being a carte blanche. It started as a carte blanche, and it shifted every week into less of a carte blanche. So you really have to put your step down and say no and negotiate when you have to, and sometimes just be really sure that this is not going in the artistic direction you want to. So a couple of examples of festival-based projects like this. I'm going to show what Joanie showed previously. So these are like examples. These are gallery projects, just to help you make connections between. You can see that there's a common aesthetic, but that the scale and the final outcome is really different. Like Joanie had to work a lot on his creative process to make strong gallery pieces that are not depending on the music and the audio-reactive, because like on a piece like Fuji, the sound is very important. It's bringing a lot of the narratives, the drama, the you know, it's the finale thanks to the music. Whereas when you're a private collector and have a piece like that in your living room, you don't want to have like sound all over the place. So you have to have a different approach to make a strong piece without the sound. So commission projects for me are interesting if they are an opportunity to test new techniques and ideas. And by that I mean new, often very expensive techniques or expensive equipment. So that's one of the Barney's projects. I have a whole really deep talk about all the process for these Barney's holiday windows and how we had a lot of challenges with fabrications, and all the artists involved are artists from the digital world who had zero experience in like building stuff. So I also see something really interesting there happening like nowadays, and of course companies like Autodesk are really helping to build bridges to help. Like this is a good example of how when you have such a detailed 3D shape, you somehow have the illusion that you press a key and it's gonna like happen. But we got stuck for 2 weeks and almost had, like, we almost think of canceling the project because none of the architects, woodworker, like specialists we send these 3D files to knew how to build specific angles. So this project was made with Boris Edelstein from MatMapper, and we had to ask Kyle to build, to code an algorithm to make it possible with some like forbidden angles to get to a shape that was possible to build. So it was really interesting to see the back and forth between the digital and the real world. And as an example of how everything is connected, both on the visual result, but also on the economic side. So we were invited last year by this festival in Spain. And Joanie had a carte blanche. We had a couple of days. They had this really high wall. I think it's 8 meters, 9 meters high wall. And we had no existing projects who could fit this wall, so that was a good excuse to make a new one. Then Joanie made the small die-bond print version to be sold as a gallery piece. And we just made some kind of intermediary size for this wall over there. So how about tomorrow? That's just a couple of, I don't know, tips, or like to maybe think of stop working for 6 months on one-offs, to always keep in mind while you are making a piece, how is it going to tour, how is it scalable, how can it have like other iterations, to share your knowledge. If you follow Joanie's work, you know, is like sharing a lot and documenting a lot of the code and the how it's made online. Get inspired and look for inspiration elsewhere than online. So my website is down because I'm like a barefoot shoemaker. But follow me on Twitter or Instagram, and I will let you know whenever this is fixed. Thank you.